Hi, I'm Don Kay, host of the Autosportradio.com show, and we are brought to you by the Indy Dental Group. It is absolutely a phenomenal place to go, and it's run by Dr. Jack Miller, a 500 veteran, and his wife, Dr. Liz Lewis. They have one of the top, if not the top-rated dental practice in the state. They got great people. My wife goes there, and she loves it. In fact, it's one of the few doctor's visits she enjoys going to, actually. So if you need dental problems or think you might, do yourself a favor. Get a hold of the Indy Dental Group. Give them a call, make an appointment. Number is 317-846-6125. That's the Indy Dental Group, Dr. Jack Miller and Dr. Liz Lewis. You'll love it. VP Insurance, 16th Street and Speedway, best place to go for insurance. And the best price, best coverage. Give them a call, tell them what you need, and they'll be sure to help you. Mike and Tom will take care of you. Give them a call. The number is 317-248-0070. They're located at 5004 West 16th Street and Speedway, just about less than a mile away from the Speedway. And if you're into sports cars and vintage cars and Trans Am, the place to go is SVRA. Check out svra.com and hit the button on the schedule, see where they're going. And they have the vintage Indy cars, they have sports cars in their events, and they also have now the Trans Am series, which is growing very rapidly, and it's doing quite well. So if you're interested in those kind of cars, which I hope you are, go to svra.com and check it out. And while you're there, subscribe to the Speed Tour magazine. It's a great magazine covering all the events that they have and the cars that they have and the drivers that they have. You might find some of the drivers you didn't know were around, they're still driving. So check it out, the Speed Tour magazine. Subscribe, you'll love it. We're at the Vintage Indy Garage, surrounded by vintage Indy cars, and the gentleman in charge of Vintage Indy Racing is my guest today, Mr. Mike Lashmett. Excuse me. And Mike, how in the world did you get into this event? I know you've been involved in motorsports for a lot of years, but what brought you into getting car owners and old cars, vintage cars in and putting on events?
Well, you're correct. I was an IndyCar mechanic going back over 50 years ago with Vels Parnelli Jones and STP Patrick Racing and others. And I didn't stay in the sport as a career my whole life. My life took another career path. But back in 2016, I went out to California for a family member's commencement. And I got invited down to AAR. I hadn't been there in about 40 years. And got invited to come and see Dan's collection and have lunch. And I did, and we were standing around in the room that Dan had the collection of about 6 or 7 Eagles in the Toyota GTP car, and Kathy Weeder, somebody said, hey, they're taking the Olsenite Eagle back for the HRE event at the Speedway in May. Why don't you go and help? Well, they didn't have to ask me twice, so I went along, helped Philippe de L'Espinay run the number 6 Olsenite Eagle, and I think there were 106 cars that year at the Speedway for that event. It was a high water mark, and the light bulb went off in my brain, and my gosh, where did all these cars come from? And at that time, Gary Monshine, who you know, was doing events at Phoenix and Pocono, and kind of became friends with him through that event and wrote a couple articles for his publication, Classic Racing Times. One thing led to another, and I came up with the idea to start a registry. And Gary encouraged me to do that. He said he was too busy to do it, so I did. And then within a year, we started getting contacted by a couple of different tracks, Chris Blair at St. Louis and George Budenfeast, who was heading Road America at the time, to bring vintage Indy cars there, and I referred them to Gary, and Gary was too busy to do those 2 events, so they came back to me, and in 2018 we did our first event at WWT Raceway in St. Louis with Chris Blair and IndyCar, and we've been off and running since then, and we've grown by about 1 event every year. And we just finished up the 2022 season at Pontiac, Michigan at M1 Concourse for the American Speed Festival, and we participated in 6 events this year.
What's the attraction to these cars? I mean, in the building where we are, you got the Roadsters, you've got Al Unser's cars, you've got all kinds of cars in there. What's the attraction? What attracted you to the sport, these cars?
Well, I grew up over near Springfield, Illinois, in a small town called Pittsfield. I had an uncle that operated a Shell gas station and built and raced super modifieds and sprint cars when I was a kid, and that's what got my interest in motorsports or racing initially. And I've always had, these cars that are in this room, for the most part, are from my era, you know, the early 60s, late 50s, all through the 70s, going up into the 80s. And there's just a passion for it within me and a lot of other people. We've got, Vintage Indy has over 200 members representing over 300 cars, and that isn't everything that's out there. So it's not just me that loves these cars. The fans love them. The history of all things Indianapolis is unquestionably probably greater than any other form of motorsports. There's no place like Indianapolis. There's Le Mans, Daytona, and Monaco, and you name it, but no place has the history the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has, or the Indy 500, and therefore there's just a huge following for these cars.
And I've been coming here for 60 years, and now I still get tinged when I go by when I drive by the Speedway. And you don't realize until you hear people that have been racing elsewhere that get the opportunity to run at the Speedway, how excited they are just to be on that track or inside the stands. It's amazing the attraction of that place. And while I was away for a couple of years down in Florida, although I chased racing down there, but we start talking about racing, and they say, "You ever been to 500? I've been there many times. You ever meet AJ Foyt?" Yeah. Really? I got a lot of business as a result of that, but people know this place. Whether they like racing, it doesn't make any difference. They still know it, and people will watch it just because it's the Indianapolis 500. And the cars and the drivers, you know, it's an amazing sport. And the thing that intrigues me the most is a lot of sports you see some of the participants get themselves in trouble. Very seldom does that happen here. They might have a few beers. But aside from that, I mean, these are good, hardworking, very smart people that are all around these cars, including the drivers, obviously.
I agree. There's no fans like Indianapolis 500 fans or IndyCar fans, period.
And it's amazing with the drivers now that are coming in from Europe who are finding this is a heck of a lot more fun to race than in European racing, because on any given Sunday or Saturday, you can win.
That's true.
I made the mistake of telling Mark Miles when I was interviewing, I said, there's 8 or 10 guys that can win on any weekend. He says, that's nuts, there's 20.
That's where they're at right now, I would say.
Yeah.
The fields are very competitive, very tight, and it makes for really interesting racing.
And with the European drivers coming from Formula One, coming here, loving it, telling their friends about it, there's a couple more that are looking to come this way this year, whether there'll be cars for them or not. But the viewership is growing, so that IndyCar is now a worldwide sport.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. And I think they're on the cusp of great things at Penske Entertainment and IndyCar and Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Got great leadership over there with Roger at the helm and Mark Miles and Doug Bowles at the Speedway, and it's unquestionably moving forward in a big way.
Well, the thing I like is Jay Fry, when he says we're going to have a 5-year program. At the end of this period, we're going to do this. And by golly, when he gets there, they're doing it.
Yeah, Jay's a great guy, and probably IndyCar couldn't have a better leader right now.
To me, every year is great, but and I worked on a team for a number of years, but I wasn't a mechanic. I mean, if it got dusty, I cleaned it. If it had sand in it because they went off on a road course, I cleaned the sand out. If they needed to get from here to there, I pushed the car. But as a mechanic, what fascinates you most about these cars?
Oh gosh, just back in the era of the 70s, you know, 1,300 horsepower Offie unrestricted engines basically that didn't have a pop-off valve yet, you know, and we're talking about a 1,500-pound car and 1,300 horsepower, so a tremendous power-to-weight ratio and just a real handful. No pit lane speed back then, and you know, these drivers were running down pit lane just about as fast as they were going down the straightaway.
I know.
And Johnny Parson tells an interesting story about when he drove for Pat Patrick in Bignotti, and he went out and ran his first few laps of practice, but he came in and George sat down on the wall with him, put his arm around him, and he said, you're slower, a lot slower than Gordy, and the reason was he wasn't running, you know, full tilt coming down pit lane, and so he corrected that right away. But yeah, that era was, you know, for me, phenomenal era.
When I think about, now they have a speed limit, but when I changed a right front tire on the car for a number of years, it didn't dawn on me. These guys are coming down there 130 miles an hour and stopping on a dime.
Yeah, you had to be a very trusting soul back then, as I like to say. And you know, they allowed us to set up for the pit stop. So you know, John Cock and, you know, Al Unser and I was on their cruise. I never worried about them coming in or how fast or, you know, clipping one of us or hitting one of us. Never had an incident like that with myself anyway.
I find it interesting when you look at these cars, some of the roadsters in particular, you think, you had to be a dummy to be driving these cars at the speedway at the speeds they ran then. Because there was very little other than seat belts, and some of them didn't have that. Whereas today's cars, they have what's called the safer barrier, and it initially was called the soft wall. Well, just for the heck of it, when we got invited out to see the wall, I ran into it. I said, that thing it's not soft at all. But the safety that's been built and the speeds are higher, but the cars are a whole lot safer than they used to be.
Tremendously safer. Going back to the roadster era, you know, Parnelli Jones I worked for, and I consider him a friend, and I jokingly tell Parnelli, back in your era, the cars were steel and the men were too. Yeah. And, you know, those guys were braver than Dick Tracy, as they used to say, and there really wasn't much protection around them at all. I mean, and the cars were very rigid, and the cars didn't absorb any energy, you know, if they hit something, and it was a remarkable era. I mean, just the courage those guys had to strap in and go.
I've always suspected if they gave them a mental check, it'd be a little on the low side to get in these cars and drive them and you know, what they put up with. But, you know, I think overall, motorsports to me is exciting, if not more exciting than most any sport that I can think of. Because if you watch a football game, they only run for about 10 seconds and they take, you know, half a minute or more off. And during an entire game, which lasts an hour, they're only in action about 10 minutes. Yeah, where you get in a race car.
Race car drivers and the IndyCar drivers especially, I mean, they're true athletes.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to strap into a car and go out there for that time period and just the mental concentration, I mean, you know, that's unique in itself. So, and let alone the physical demands of being, you know, driving that car and being strapped in for that long and whatnot.
Well, when I first came down here, their exercise was lifting a glass of beer in their hand after the track closed. Now you go up to Pittsfield and you see what these guys do, and you go, the last time I was up there, I looked at the wall of the leaders in the various disciplines they have, and the guy on top of most all of them, Scott Dixon.
Scott Dixon.
Scott Dixon is at the top.
Well, the drivers today, they're in phenomenal condition. They're very lean, they're very fit, and they're all into staying fit. And, you know, I can't say that it was that way in my era.
No. Because they weren't going that fast. They didn't have to react that quick. It's amazing how quickly you have to observe and make a decision just that fast.
Right.
Because if you don't, there could be a wall or another car that you get together.
I mean, going back years ago, there was an argument that used to be made that the human brain didn't work fast enough to react. And, you know, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I think, you know, there's conditioning exercises for the mind and the brain and the body, and, you know, obviously these guys do that. So
what's next for Indy Registry? Do you combine with Tony Perella from SVRA and run cars? Because he has a number of cars in his group as well as you have, so you put the two of them together and you wouldn't have room at the racetrack for anybody else.
Well, we've primarily done companion events with IndyCar. We did 3 this past year. We're back at Road America this past summer for the 3rd year. We were at St. Louis for the 5th year, and we were at Nashville for the 2nd year. But beyond IndyCar, we've done events with ARCA at the Milwaukee Mile. We've done the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in Shenley Park, which is a fabulous event. We've done the American Speed Festival this summer. We closed with that event at Pontiac, Michigan at the new M1 Concourse facility, which is absolutely world class. And then you're correct, we were invited by Tony. He was very gracious in inviting us to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the SVR Speed Tour this summer. And we were there housed in the F1 garages. There were 42 vintage Indy cars there, from really early, you know, pre-war cars all the way up through the early 90s. And we were on the road course there with SVRA and also on the oval. We've been invited back again for this year, and we're planning on having that on our schedule. And we're really looking forward to working with Tony, and not only at that event, but maybe doing some other events with SVRA in the future.
You know, when you look at these cars and say, where are they? I understand there's more around than you realize. People have them, and they got them.
It's amazing. And you have certain people, collectors looking, ardently for certain cars, and every now and then they get lucky and find one, but most Indy cars survived, believe it or not. People were smart enough to hang on to them, regardless of what kind of condition they were in, and they're still being discovered. In fact, great race cars are still being discovered. When you got here, over here in front of us, they can't see it on camera, is a USAC Champ dirt car that was built by Bill Finley for Tassie Vadas, and it was driven by Johnny Parsons famously for 7 seasons. It was on the Hoosier 100 pole in 75 and 76. His 76 fast time stood for 13 years. Very important car. I went looking for it. I'm one of those collectors that went looking for it a few years ago. I tracked it down. The owner was the son of the person who had bought it from Tassie way back in 79. They weren't ready to sell it. And, I waited a couple of years. They got back to me about a year ago. They contacted me and said they were ready to sell. And I went down to Titusville, Florida, and it was in storage down there. And ended up buying the car and all the spares, and it's back here for restoration. So, they are out there.
Yeah, I was part of the ownership of the Antares, and I understand now somebody has it over in Ohio someplace. I have never chased it because I don't want to buy it. I wouldn't have anything to do.
Out in, where's he at, Oregon or Washington? He's one of our members. He has one of the Antares. I was down recently at the old Louis Schweitzer building here in Indianapolis, which has been repurposed into a lot of different things and shops. And there was a place down there that had some kind of a bowling venue, and I believe there's one of the Antares is sitting down there, and they told me it was owned by the IMS Museum and it was on loan to them. So
Could be. I know it was originally built, and the guy who built it said I'd been better off to put wings on a computer because the car didn't run that well to start with.
Well, I well remember that car. Roger McCluskey had one and Patrick Racing had one, and McCluskey qualified his for Lindsey Hopkins for the 500 that year, and Sweet Savage and Rutherford opted for a Brabham and an Eagle instead, but I'm thinking they did run that car at other tracks.
Well, we took it out to California, and I won't mention who it was, came by and went, "What are you doing with that thing?"
Yeah, they weren't the prettiest cars. So.
However, it made the show.
It did, yeah.
And this smart ass that had cackled, his car broke. And he's walking down, I said, "Oh, by the way, what happened to you?" He still talks to me, strangely enough, but there's been some interesting ideas. The guys and gals now that are involved in the sport to come up with these ideas and come up with this stuff. It's amazing, how the brain works, and if somebody gets an idea and just a little, as fast as they're going, the aerodynamics are huge. And they come up with little ideas that, geez, the car goes a half mile an hour faster. Wow.
Mm-hmm. If you look at cars today, they're running with far less horsepower than they did in the early mid-'70s, and the reason they're going faster basically is the aerodynamics and the tires and whatnot, and the improvements in all of that over the past, 4 or 5 decades.
And when I first came here, an engine was big.
Big.
Now, for crying out loud, you can almost put them in a shoebox.
Yeah, they're small.
They're small, and the power.
I've got Mario's winning engine from 1969 on a stand. You may have seen it in my office. And
yeah.
That's a Ford 4-camber, and those things were huge and wide and high, and a turbo offie too was a big chunky engine. So
it's amazing what's happened over the time, and Honda people, and I'm sure Chevy the same way, but Honda said that they send engineers and rotate them. They come up with ideas from the race car and put them in street cars, which obviously makes sense. Mm-hmm. Not that your street car is going to run 230 miles an hour, but they can run 230 miles an hour for 500 miles, and they pick up little things. In fact, during the season, they'll make little changes. It'll make a difference. It's amazing what you think. What more can they do? Well, they find things that they can do to make them faster and stronger and last longer.
The profile of an engine dictates the profile of the car and how big a hole that car is punching through the air, and I think that's another reason we see these engines being a lot smaller and more compact, and the cars are a lot, they can obviously have better aerodynamics and whatnot because of that.
Well, Indy Registry, are you getting contacted? What kind of people buy these cars? Is it the CEO of major corporations or just race fans that have a few bucks and find them?
We've got, the gamut of of ownership and membership in Vintage Indy, the car owner membership area of it's a wide swath. I've got everybody from just a regular working guy that, you know, has found one of these cars, restored it himself, maintains it, and runs it and has a great time with it, all the way up to retired CEOs. One of our members is the former number 2 guy under Jamie Dimond at J.P. Morgan Chase. We've got CEOs from, you know, major corporations, and we've got doctors and dentists and lawyers and just a little bit of everything. I mean, it's not an inexpensive hobby, mind you, but there are people that, you know, have a lot of passion for it, just regular folks that have restored these cars and continue to restore them.
You know, it's interesting. The first time that Tony was at the Speedway, I was out there, and here comes a transporter pulling a car in, and I'm looking around and said, where's the driver? Oh, he'll be here. What do you mean? He's not here? Oh, he's flying in. Oh, really? He doesn't come with a gang? No, he's a businessman, and he'll fly in for the weekend. I thought, oh, well, that's when I realized, you know, some of the people that are involved in this sport you would never suspect.
Right.
But they're here.
They're here. We've got over here in the building, I think right now we've got over 30 vintage Indy cars. There's about 16 restored running cars in this room that we're sitting in, and then over in other parts of the building are cars that are being restored, cars that are in queue up on the wall on racks to be restored. And you know, we maintain and keep cars here, do race services for some of these owners, make sure their cars get transported to events, all that sort of thing. Not so much Vintage Indy, but Rick Duman and Duman Turn 4 Restorations, who I'm partnered with here in this space.
Does Rick keep busy, or does he sit in the office and make notes?
Well, you know, as the business grows, he's in the office more than he's out in the shop, but he's in the shop, and they've got a good bunch of guys, Tim Whiting and Art Lasky and Scott Jackson and others that work here, that, you know, for the restoration and maintaining of these cars. But Rick's backed up with business. I mean, the business of restoration is good. I was just at the Newman Haas auction yesterday up in Lincolnshire, and one of our members bought 4 cars, and they're coming here. Fortunately, we got enough empty spaces on the wall rack to put them up there for the time being. But, you know, Rick's backed up probably realistically several years with restoration work. So,
really?
Yeah.
And he's not the only one doing it. Walter Goodwin
the only one doing it. I mean,
Walter
Goodwin down in the old Vels Parnelli Jones building, that historic building on 15th Street, and Don Hovel up in Chicagoland. Don was with Newman Haas for, I don't know, 20-some years, but Rick's not the only guy doing it. There's an industry around vintage IndyCar restoration and ownership.
That's amazing. You don't realize it until you walk into a place like this. You say, holy smoke.
Yeah.
In fact, I got a call from Walter yesterday, I think it was, looking for some information on a car. Very interesting, the number of people and businesses that are in the business of restoration, because the cars are there. You just keep stumbling onto them.
The business is there. You know, somebody like Rick Duman here at D24R, I mean, you know, we keep a lot of people you know, going like a lot of others do. Platers, painters, the Magnaflux and Zyglo folks, parts people. It trickles down into the economy, and as I said, there's a whole industry around it. Engine builders, gearbox people, you name it. You know, Rick Long over at Speedway Engines, and he does a lot of engines for our restoration work here, and you know, there's just a lot of businesses out there that we are dependent upon to help get these cars back together.
Yeah, people don't realize Herb Porter's business is still going.
That is correct. Rick Long and Herb Porter. I've known, I remember when Rick went to work for Herb Porter with Carl Cindric, and they were working out of, I forget the garage numbers, over in the old gasoline alley. And Herb back then built all the test engines for Goodyear. I was just at a book signing out in Philadelphia last weekend at the Simeone with Roger Bailey, and he tells some good stories about working with Herb and Rick and Carl Cindric, because they were involved with McLaren and Goodyear back then. And yeah, so Rick goes way back, over 50 years.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And still going strong, and does all the midget engines, and, you know, does offies for us. And
yeah, got quite a business. And you were saying you get stories from Roger Bailey. You betcha you do.
Yeah, you do.
But you got to have boots on when you're listening to him, though.
I mean, Roger lived it. I mean, he really
yeah.
did. I mean, I have his book in my office. He signed it for me, and you know, we share mutual friends. Barry Briggs is a good friend of mine, a multi-time speedway bike racer, and he and Chris Amon were good friends from New Zealand. Of course, Roger was the chief mechanic for Chris Amon at Ferrari, and both F1 car and Can-Am. Yeah, he's got a lot of history.
Well, I got to drag him in here one of these days, have a chat with him.
He's going to come to the shop. He's not been here, and so I've invited him. So he's really anxious to come and see everything.
Well, you know, it seems that the vintage Indy, or you know, the old-time cars are still around. They're still being bought. They're still being run, and you have got a group that has the cars. Of the membership you have, how many normally? Because everybody can't go to every event you have, I assume. But how many cars on an average do you have at an event?
We average between 25 and 30 cars, and that's been historically consistent since our very first event at St. Louis, which was back in 2018 with IndyCar. I think we had 26 cars there, and that average between 25 and 30 is a good number, and we can pretty much expect that wherever we go. We have some people like Bruce Lensmeyer with the STP turbine car. He came to every event this year, and he lives in Orlando, and he was going back and forth to wherever our event was from down there. But some of these guys do just about every event, and then we've got others that, everybody's got a life. They have families, they have other interests, and they've got work, and you'd be surprised how many show up consistently.
Well, that's neat. I think it's interesting to see, the interest in these cars, and hopefully the fans will realize that and start showing up to see some of the cars. I mean, I see cars in here that I saw when I first started. I mean, when I came up to Speedway, the current car, they were roadsters.
Right.
That's what was here. And I got to know Jim Hurtubise, and that was great, because he always had a garage with a car sitting. You open up
Cold beer.
And it had full of beer, and where the engine was supposed to be.
Well, in this room where we're sitting right across from us, the people watching, hopefully we'll shoot some video when we're done here, but we've got the 1950 pole winner over here, Walt Faulkner's. It's a Curtis Craft Offie that was owned by J.C. Agajanian. So the cars in this room alone range from the 1950 pole winning Curtis Craft car all the way to Little Al's rookie year car, which is to your right, which is an Eagle. And there's McLarens in here, there's PC6s, Champ Dirt cars, Eagles, two Gerhardts towards the back, and just a little bit of everything, really from 1950 all the way up through the early 80s in this room.
And these all run.
They're all running cars. They've all participated at events with us. We've got Dario Franchitti's rookie year car over here off camera to the right of the Eagle, which later on in 2002 was driven in the last 7 races by Tony Renna. That's probably the newest car in the room. It's 2002 Dallara. But just a tremendous amount of history just in this room alone, not counting the others. A couple spaces.
That's for sure. And unfortunately, Tony Renna lost his life in practice at the Speedway.
Tragically, yeah.
But I had him scheduled to be on my program that following Tuesday.
Well, this car was back in the kart IRL split.
Yep.
This was Dario's rookie year car, and he started 28th, finished 19th with it. Team Green didn't need the car after Indy, so they sold it to the team that Renna and Allen and Scott Sharp were driving for, and he became a 3rd driver for them and finished out the season 7 races in 2002, and then 2003 they got a new Dallara for Tony, and they only had funding for the 500, and he drove that and then worked as a spotter, and then of course got the contract with Chip, and during a test lost his life.
That's a shame. He's a good kid, nice guy. Well, this is an interesting place. Tell us where you're located in case anybody watching this says, hey, I'd like to come over and take a tour.
Well, we welcome fans. Just call ahead, make sure that I'm here or Rick's here, and we've got time to do it. But we're at 489 South Point Circle in Brownsburg. We're right behind the former Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan IndyCar shops. They're in the process of moving out from most of that space, not all of it, up to their new place in Zionsville. And you can visit VintageIndyRegistry.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook and message me personally if you want to come out and get a tour. And if I'm around, I'm not here all the time, but I go back and forth between here and Georgia. But there's a good chance you can get in here and see this.
Now, you have a mansion here in town somewhere, don't you?
No, not yet.
Oh.
I don't know if I'm going to have a mansion, but I am in the process of moving to Indianapolis, and
I thought you told me you bought a place or something here,
Well,
a couple of years ago.
not quite yet, but I'm working on it. So,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here a lot. I think I've been home to Georgia 3 times since May, and for just a week at a time. So I've spent 3 weeks there since May 2nd or something like that.
Oh, I see. Well, you got to go and cut the grass, dust the house or something.
Yeah, I just had a car shipped up here, and Mini Cooper's miles ahead's been our pace car provider for the last 3 years. They're based in Carmel, and they've been gracious enough in their facility up there to allow me to stay in a studio apartment they have the past 2 summers. So.
Is there an office number that somebody can call in case they're like me and say, what was that email address?
They can reach out to me at 424-230-9155. And if I don't answer, just leave a message. I answer all my messages. So.
He does, actually. I left a message, and before I finished the message I was leaving him, he called me back, so he won't call you.
We love the fans and followers of Vintage Indy and all things Indianapolis. If you've ever been to one of our events, and I know you have, we get thousands of people through our paddock. One of the criteria when we make a deal to go to an event is I ask the promoters that the race fans' admission ticket be their pit pass into the Vintage Indy paddock. So when we're at St. Louis or Road America or down at Nashville, our paddock's open, so fans come by the thousands. Our drivers and owners and mechanics are very engaging with fans and kids, and a lot of the owners let the kids, younger children sit in their cars, and they engage and talk to the fans, and we really want the exposure of the history of Indianapolis to go forward with all the fans and followers.
Well, I think what you're doing, what Tony's doing to bring these vintage Indy cars and sports cars to the public and run them, see them actually run, and some of the drivers that they bring that have been retired for a number of years, some of them for 20, 30 years, that get back in the car, strap in, and go out and run. So you get to see them as well. So it's a fun weekend. So if you check them out, and how can they go to vintageindy.com?
VintageIndyRegistry.com.
And you can find your schedule, where you are.
2023 schedule will be on there, and of the 200 some cars that's in Vintage Indy right now, I think there's about 100 on our website. You can check them out, and they're by era and year. I want to mention too, you're talking about former drivers. Al Unser Jr. has driven our pace car at every event the past 3 years, and he's a great spokesman for us. And I tease him and call him an ambassador for Vintage Indy, but he truly is, and he's been a real blessing to have him on board, and he's agreed to come back in 2023 and drive the pace car again for us.
It's amazing, and I think he may be like a lot of these guys that have been retired. I know I used to be acquainted with Roger Ward Sr., and I said, and we'd be walking, and people stopped and want his autograph. I said, does it surprise you? He said, are you kidding? I didn't think anybody remember me, but they do.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the minutia of history in Indianapolis, even the tiniest of things, and definitely the drivers, it's ensconced in fans' brains. I mean, they know. It's surprising how much knowledge they have. And it's really fun to talk to fans and, find out what they really do know and what they have a deep appreciation for.
And I think the interesting thing is, the driver, but there's 25 or 30 people behind him. It's like the quarterback of a football team. You know him, but you know the left guard's name? No. But if he makes a mistake, then you'll hear his name because they'll be telling you on television.
We used to know the chief mechanics and not only the drivers, but we knew the George Bignottis and Clint Brauners and, you name it, Wayne Leary's and others. We don't so much know that anymore, but yeah.
Well, it's a fun sport. It's an exciting sport. And if you're into it, here's a place you can come to take a look at some of the cars maybe you knew when you first started, like I did, or meet some of the people that are involved in it. So give Mike a call up here, call Rick, come up and take a tour. And I want to thank you for your time. It's on a Sunday, and I drug you out of bed early and got you here and get a chance to chat. So we enjoyed doing it, and we encourage people, come on up here and take a look. If you haven't been here, come here. It's exciting. And when he says they got cars on the wall, he's not kidding. They're stacked up because they need room, so they get the cars off the floor, put them on a wall. Wouldn't that be nice to do that in your house?
Yeah.
In fact, if you go to see Dr. Jack Miller, if you go into, I forget his office in Carmel, he's got his original car hanging from the ceiling. The Crest car is hanging in his office. You walked into the waiting room, good grief, it's there. So it's fun. Thanks to Mike for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks to you for watching. Until the next time, Don Kay saying thanks for being here. We'll see you again.